All right, ladies and gentlemen, summertime approaches. It's getting hot in here. Why is that? Because it's time for hot technologies. Yes, indeed. My name is Eric Cavanaugh. I will be your moderator for the show that is designed to talk about what's hot, what's happening, what is the cool stuff out there in the marketplace. This is our partnership with Techopedia. We love these guys. We've been working with them for several years now. They have a fantastic site. If you want to know anything in the tech world, what its definition might be, go to techopedia.com. And today we're talking about MDM, Master Data Management. The exact title is The Biggest Picture, Knowing Your Customer Across Multiple Platforms. And this game is changing, folks, I can tell you right now. So there's a slide about yours truly. Hit me up on Twitter at Eric_Cavanaugh. I try to reply to anyone who replies to me. So the year's hot. It's sure hot for MDM, and I tell you what, it's hot not just for the big enterprises, but also for the small to medium-sized businesses who, guess what, have lots of different systems, CRM systems, email marketing systems, ERP systems, web analytics systems, e-business suites, et cetera, et cetera. There are lots of different points of access to information about customers, and the better a job the companies can do at weaving that all together, the better they're going to be able to serve the customer, not tick off the customer, and keep those customers around, keep them buying some more stuff. I've actually tracked MDM personally since about 2003, which is around when the term was really coined. Frankly, there was a bank, Chase Bank, in fact. It was Chase Bank back then. I think it was Bank One way back then. And one of my good friends now, a guy named Joe Northern, worked with a company called Raza Solutions, and they had what became the DRM tool over at Oracle. So they actually rolled up accounts and did hierarchy management for the bank way back then, and that's some of the early days of master data management. So these days we talk about both analytical and operational MDM. We're going to talk about a lot of that stuff today and really help you understand how you can leverage this technology to get that complete view of your customer, to understand who they are, and to make sure that you can take care of their needs in what is a frankly very competitive environment worldwide. We're seeing that all over the place. So, rock star cast of characters here: Des Blanchfield, Robin Bloor, John Evans, and Diana Collins, calling in from 4 different locations all around the planet. We start off with Des Blanchfield, and with that, I'm going to hand the keys to you, Des, and I'll start tweeting. Take it away.
Thank you, Eric. I just had to remind myself to get off mute. I apologize for that. Thank you for the opportunity to present on this. So I'm going to come at this from the point of view of a actual real-world example of an organizational challenge to deal with what I've referred to as one of the biggest disruptions to organizations they're going to see for some time. We've seen a number of challenges. You know, the GFC hit companies, they had to deal with it. We get regular changes in law around privacy that we have to deal with. But one of the things that I think organizations are being caught out with that they didn't see coming was the impact of this whole celebrity experience issue. And it's essentially people running around with mobile phones wanting instant gratification in some ways, but instant gratification in a good way, not a petulant, childish way, just a realization that they're the customer, they're paying the money, and they should be getting the value for it. And so there's been this coinage of customer-centricity or becoming a customer-centric organization. And so I'm going to quickly walk through what that means and lead into a slightly more technical part of our discussion soon. So I'm just going to put it out there and say that, firstly, being a customer-centric organization, it comes down to one simple thing. You need a complete view of your customer and your customer data. So you may have different systems. You may have 20 different products. You might have 50 different departments in your organization, but no matter where you are in the organization, no matter what your job function is, you should be able to get a complete view of all of your customers or the customers that are in context to what your job function is. And every part of the data set that you have, or all parts of the data sets you have that tell you what the state of the nation for that customer is. So I put this line that a complete picture of customers across all of your systems isn't just a nicety. Nowadays, it's a necessity. And the first time you get caught out in a scenario where you're dealing with anything to do with a customer, particularly if it's live on the phone or in a web chat or in person, which is even more frightening, and you can't tell them everything that you should know about them, it becomes very obvious, and it's a really unfortunate situation to be in. So I'm going to start out with a very quick anecdote around a real-world scenario. This is a photo of a whiteboard, and this is less than 5 days old. This is an actual scenario in a whiteboard in a room recently, a couple of days ago, talking about this very topic of how do we go from being a very large organization with something like 90 different parts of our business. It's an Asian bank. They have about 90 different business units. They do everything from society loans and peer-to-peer and microloans all the way through to financing, putting satellites in space. So they're a monster. They have tens of millions of clients. I think they've got just under 50 million clients. And they are faced with this typical challenge of how do we approach not just master data management, but customer data in particular, and that single view of the client. And as we mapped it out, the thing that jumped off us from this whiteboard was they had not just a problem, they had a nightmare because none of their systems talked to each other. I could go into any part of the bank or any part of the business and ask for a loan, and it might be a car loan, a house loan, a small business loan, and they couldn't tell themselves anything, or they couldn't discover anything about any other relationship I had with the bank. And it's absolutely scaring the daylights out of them because they realize that the banks down the road can already do this, and they're potentially 12, 15 years behind the eight ball. And it comes down to these key value propositions that clients are just looking for, which is just a consistent view of me as a customer, and you need to figure out how you're going to live with that. Particularly now that I'm dealing with you on the web, or more likely to be the case via an app these days. So it's come down to this key thing of it's all about me, the customer. And so when we map out what the customer-centric culture looks like, it's about incorporating everything we've got from core systems that capture things like your first name, last name, and other details when you fill in a form or sign up online or come to us at a counter somewhere at an outlet, and we get to know you initially through the entire journey of us delivering product or sales or service to you. And mapping that out from top to bottom, continually refining the data and the data models we use to understand that, aligning how those technologies and processes and business workflows continually tighten up our view of you, the ongoing engagement that we have with you, how we continually focus around you and a client and how we communicate with you. I don't want, if I'm selling you 3 services, I don't want to be sending you 3 different pieces of paper every month or 3 statements or bills and so on. So that customer-centric story is getting some real traction now. And organizations are seeing the value of it. It's still a real challenge in that is, okay, well, I've got 10 different systems and they don't talk to each other. I don't have a tool or a system or a platform to pull it all together. And invariably people end up in a room doing whiteboard sessions like the one I just showed you. But it all comes down to one core thing in the left-hand corner there of a transformation. And transformation from culture of the organization and the people and the staff and the operational model all the way down to the technology stack that supports them. So there's a fairly common checklist that organizations go through to get to this point where they even understand the challenge of what it means to be customer-centric and all the need to build a system and get access to tools that can help them do this. So it's things like mapping the customer journey through the full life cycle and experience that they have with you as an organization, refining your operating models, and how you're organizing yourselves to be focused on the customer and the value proposition you're providing the customer. And then, of course, aligning your technologies and your technology stacks and processes around them to make sure that you are actually continually driving further engagement and better and tighter engagement with your clients. And the actual engagement process itself from the executives downwards. So if you haven't changed your view of the world from the top of your food chain, from the boardroom downwards, then there's little chance that your depot level or your day-to-day front-end staff are going to change their behavior. So you have to lead from the top. You have to continually refresh and redefine and redevelop how you address targeting the actual focus on the clients. So, how are you bringing about not just the cultural shift at the top end, but behavioral change at the bottom end of the organization and the tools that you're making available to do that. It's one thing to say you're a customer-centric organization and you want people to behave one way, but if you haven't given them the means and the tools and the capability of doing that, you're not going to get a behavioral shift because people will just keep falling back into the habits they've known prior to thinking they were a customer-centric organization. And then the overall integration of the disparate parts of the organization and the culture that lives inside that and obviously underpinned by the tools and the platforms. So how do you take these disparate business units or businesses or parts of your organization and have them behave differently from a cultural point of view and downwards? Well, you provide them the appropriate tools and ways and means to get that complete and single view of the client and the client experience. And then how do you put some KPIs and measures against that and track them and put some metrics against those and measure those KPIs and provide value to that, business value to yourselves, and obviously value in some form in the value chain to the customer and keep them coming back. And then incorporate all of the communication you've got with your clients from feedback and real-time or iteratively processed so that your behavior and your cultural shift hopefully gets captured in some sort of feedback cycle and feedback loop, and you can figure out whether you're actually hitting the mark or not. So we've got to the scenario where, eventually organizations are going to find themselves effectively drowning in disparate data, and we see some sources here. There are some internal, some external. Historically we've had customer relationship management platforms and advertising platforms and marketing platforms. We've had all kinds of different systems that run independently, and then hopefully they do talk to each other in some form. We've had in the last couple of years we've had an explosion of the interactions with you now. So we talk to you via social media, we talk to you via our website, we're getting emails from you. Our IVR systems that talk to you via the phone are now having to map that data back and tell us how you dealt with our phone system and interact with our databases, and if you've been on a phone call with us. All that's got to be captured in real time, and we need to be able to make sure that we can get a common view of that, which hopefully is that common data management platform in the center of that diagram there. There's a phrase that's been coined recently of a celebrity customer experience. Well, what does that really mean? It's not that we think our end users or our consumers are badly behaved celebrities and that they feel different in any way. What it means is we've woken up to the fact that we should be treating every one of our customers as a celebrity. They should be getting the VIP treatment from the very moment we meet them through the entire life cycle of our having the pleasure of having them as customers. And so the question that I get asked on a regular basis, bringing this back to a slightly more anecdotal real story of client, is how do we enable our organization to deliver on that increasing demand for a celebrity customer experience? Because the thing we're seeing now is one of the greatest disruptions to organizations is that requirement to deliver on that promise to clients, to give them a celebrity customer experience. Organizations, from my experience, and certainly around the world that I'm seeing, are being disrupted without realizing it, with the shift from other influences that they might have already known about or seen coming to their actual customers. Their customers are disrupting them and disrupting them in a very serious way. And then if you can't provide this celebrity experience and provide the tools and the ways and the means for your organization to get that single view of the client, then you're going to miss by a mile, a country mile at least, the capability and the capacity to deliver on that promise. So there's some key points that I'm going to throw out here and then hand over to Robin to get into slightly more technical detail that I recommend that all organizations think very hard and fast about to see if they're even remotely close to this delivering on the promise to their staff and their organization to become a customer-centric entity. And that is that focus on the basic components and create a single customer view. That sounds very simple, but what does it mean? Well, it means making sure you've got the right data from the right data sources all the time and at the right time. Making sure that the data is available in the right place all the time, not just some of the time. And it has to be tightly integrated, and it has to be natively built into your platforms. It can't just be something you think you do as a single marketing campaign. Every time you look at a customer, you need to be able to get this all the time. It needs to be available to all the right people all the time. So I don't want to be running around the hallways looking for tribal knowledge. I need to be able to get this at a moment's notice just by getting to one tool. And you need to provide it on the right platform with the right tools. So it has to be built into the existing systems you're already using. So your CRM needs to be able to see everything from when I'm visiting you, from my mobile app, from the website, from talking to your IVR, interactive voice recordings, to go through your phone help desk, my self-service, or if I push *9 and I get to the human beings and I ask a slightly more challenging question that the IVR isn't programmed to deal with. If I tweet something happy, if I've written an article on LinkedIn, these all need to eventually feed back into the CRM so that if I'm managing anything here with a customer, I'm able to see that. We need to make it the default and not the exception. It's still very much the exception that people want to run a campaign, they want to run a sales and marketing effort, or they're looking to solve some problem or deal with a pricing issue. And we run a one-off campaign and try and get a single view of a particular segment of our clients, and somebody starts running reports and printing things off and handing them around in bound printed copy format. That's an exception. It needs to be the default. Your systems have to all the time provide this single view of the client in any way we come at it, whether it's a sales or marketing or just an operational or manufacturing or logistics or whatever it might be point of view. And the reality is you're going to have to do all of that before you can see a solid ROI on your investment in this transition to becoming a customer-centric organization. You're going to get some quick wins. There are definitely going to be quick wins. And so there's some good news on that front. But the reality is that until you complete a transition to becoming a full single view of your client, customer-centric organization, that ROI isn't going to jump off the screen at you. And it's a fun journey, it's a worthwhile journey, and it is all underpinned by having the right tools, the right platforms, and making it available to your organization at the earliest possible time in a sensible, technical, and commercially viable form. With that in mind, I'm going to hand over to Robin. Robin?
Thank you, Des. I had to do the same as you. I had to unmute myself. Okay, I was going to approach this more from a conceptual point of view than the kind of practical scenario that Des went through. We're really talking about a very specific set of activities within an organization when we get into the area of MDM. And of course, customer is the big deal. The entity identity of customer is much, much more difficult to get at for a whole host of reasons than anything else. It's likely to be the most important entity. There are some businesses where, like, they may only have one customer and they may have all the information that they could get about that customer. They're very rare. Mostly organizations have multiple customers and the customers have multiple facets. And the data is pretty much spread all over the place. What I wanted to, I've been kind of working with this idea fairly recently, the idea of the data pyramid, that, you know, there's a distinct difference between data and information and knowledge, and actually understanding, but data, information, and knowledge can live in computers. And, you know, data at the lowest level is just signals and measurements and information you can get your hands on, which is put in.
Your audio is starting to fade out a bit, Robin, just so you know.
Okay, I'll move the microphone. How about that?
There you go. Sounds much better.
Okay.
There you go.
Yeah, so data is made up primarily of signals, measurements, recordings, and things like that. It has no specific context. It becomes information by giving it that context, linking data together, structuring the data, creating visualizations, glossaries, schemas, anything you want to create around it. It gets transferred into knowledge when, in one way or another, you can actually start to predict the behavior of a given entity and also implement policies and rules for handling it. Understanding lives entirely in human beings. And that's part of the problem. And when you actually look at the fragmentation that exists in terms of the customer situation, you often discover that, well, really, sales has one view of customer, marketing has another, sales support or actually just customer maintenance has a different view. There may be many touch points that a customer has with an organization, and none of that's integrated into properly structured information, or a lot of it isn't integrated. And then we have the problem that has started to become much more prevalent in the past few years of you can gather external data on people, and that's very, very useful, but you actually have to integrate that for that to have any real value. So in the refinement of data, the difficulties arise, or the big difficulties arise from fragmentation, that data is coming from different places and it's not well structured. And the fact that there tends to be an incessant supply of new data, and this is nearly always the case when it comes to customer. And every entity is a moving target. We didn't care, perhaps 3 or 4 years ago, we didn't really care about the social media profile of customers. But we care about it now. We care about it because it can be damaging to an organization or boosting to an organization, depending on what's going on out there. So if you actually have the idea, if you sat down and did an exercise and tried to work out what were the things that you were interested about customer, 5 years ago, and you do it again, you discover that stuff has been added. And stuff may have been taken away, you know. I mean, nobody cares anymore, for instance, what fax number people actually have. Some people used to have fax numbers on their business cards, but no one cares anymore because fax died. So it's a moving target. When you look at data modeling and MDM, the first thing that one actually has to say about this is that this is part of data governance. If you're not doing this, then there's a problem in the way that you're governing data, because if you're not actually doing data modeling and MDM, then in one way or another you don't actually have a very good top-down view of any given entity in actual fact. But I've listed here data governance, I've listed lineage, data usage, quality, security, service management, recovery. You could add life cycle and so on. There's an awful lot to data governance, and data modeling and MDM is a fundamental and perhaps central part of that. Change comes from the top down in the sense that you realize change is occurring because people realize that it's occurring. And therefore, one might think in terms of this whole stack from files and databases through data elements to metadata and business definitions. You might think in terms of actually having to, in one way or another, to manage the whole stack and keep the whole stack up to date, because knowing something at a business definition level doesn't actually mean that you're catching the data at file and database level. It's a very broad picture, and until you actually think about it, you don't realize how broad it is. The modeling and MDM, if you actually look at, you know, the whole big data trend isn't simply about that there's a lot more data. It's about that there's a lot more data from a lot more sources, giving you a lot more perspectives on any given entity that you're actually collecting information about. And the more complex that is, the more you need a model. The less easy it is to comprehend just by looking at, let's say, a database schema, what's going on when data is actually coming from, you know, 10, 20, 30 sources. So in theory, you could say it was MDM gives you a view of the data universe, but in practice, it's actually part of it. It's actually, as I've kind of just discussed, you know, if you're looking at the business meaning of data, then that, you know, the information about the meaning of data is actually part of the data universe that you're looking at. Modeling is from top down and from bottom up. That is that you can look at things from a business perspective, but you can also look at things from the perspective of what we got, you know, and you build in both directions. And this is not and never can be a project. To start it off is a project.
Conference recording has stopped.
That's just the backup. Don't worry. Go ahead.
Okay. It's an ongoing activity. You may kick it off as a project because you don't having anything coherent in place, but once you've kicked it off, it should be an ongoing activity. And anything that's done within the sphere of data, the MDM team, if you like, should know about it. The customer challenges, just focusing on the customer entity. There's way more data available now about the customer from far more sources than for any other entity by far, and it just seems to increase all the time. It's often inaccurate. You know, if you're gathering data from me, for instance, if you're gathering data about me, you will realize that I have different identities, which is just whether I use middle initials or not. When I go to various websites. And I do that often just to discover where I'm going to get spam from a given identity. But a lot of people do that, you know, and then people make accidental errors, and then information's out of date. I went to one of these data resources that claims to be able to give you lots and lots of information about any given individual, and did the obvious thing and asked questions about myself. And half of the information they gave me was actually out of date, and some of it was wrong anyway. You know, and you look at that and you think, well, if you're going to, in one way or another, gather data from other sources, then there's a huge element of cleansing the data and being able to identify whether it's the data you've got. We have no, as individuals, we have no unique identifier. You know, name and mobile phone number will probably get you close to most people, but not everybody has a mobile phone number, and it's different in different cultures as well. And then there's the nature of data in terms of analytics, and I'm not going to go into this in any depth, but you know, data can be select. You know, if you've got somebody's Twitter data, that there's only a small population of individuals that actively put data on Twitter, and they're select. They are not randomly selected customers. They're the ones that have decided that they want to be vociferous on Twitter. You know, it's notoriously difficult to get a 360-degree view of the customer, and that's partly simply because of everybody's technical history. It's not unusual to discover that there's 3 or more customer databases just as databases, never mind lots of other sources of information that you actually collect about the customer. And customer analytics, it's worth saying that it's a huge opportunity now. We used to do segmentation and churn, but now it's really, because there's an awful lot of external data available on customers, you can do an awful lot of relationship graph analytics, which is really relatively new. You can use predictive analytics that you never knew before. You can gather fashion information and opinion information that you could never gather before. So there's a very good reason to review what you're doing in respect of the customer, and to think in terms of how you can best leverage the data you have. A practical view, the modeling of the customer entity is a necessary activity for the sake of accurate and useful BI and the refinement of knowledge. In other words, it's not, you know, if you've got a reasonably large population of customers, it's not really an optional thing. You kind of have to do it. And I think that's all I've got to say. Let's pass the ball on.
All right. So, John, I believe you're going next, and then Diana will do a demo. So with that, John Evans, take it away. And folks, don't be shy. Send your questions in at any time. We'll be monitoring that for the Q&A. Take it away, John Evans.
All righty. Thank you, Eric, and thank you, Des and Robin, for that introduction and those comments. You know, there's a lot of overlap between what you talked about there and what we're going to talk about in the show today, which is great. And we would definitely agree that on this notion of customer centricity is something that people are seeking to achieve. And I think at the root of that, we'd say that having good data as you can get about your customers is the only way to have a prayer of achieving that. So what we want to do today is talk about customer-oriented master data management and share with everyone a little bit about how we approach that, solving that issue, and talk about a new offering that we've just introduced that's designed to make it easy for companies of all sizes to deliver better customer data throughout their fragmented data landscape. So that landscape could look something like this. So we've got a variety of systems around the perimeter here, lots of fragmented applications. Some of them are running in the cloud, some of them are running on premises. And within each of these, by definition, you're going to have different ways of identifying customers and customer information, different models of customer data with different attributes, different hierarchies, and so forth. And even if you're an organization where you consider yourself to be, you know, an SAP shop or an Oracle shop, where you're just running your business on SAP, for example, or just on Oracle, or you're using Salesforce, you may have multiple instances of those systems even within your own company. Maybe they're deployed by a different location or by a region. You've got set up for different regions, different zones of the world, or you might have them set up differently by line of business. And even if you've got a single ERP, if you've done any customization across those, there's going to be conflicts in the data. Now, the fragmentation we're seeing is further compounded by the increase in adoption of cloud-based systems and best-of-breed applications. So, while a really large, complex, convoluted environment like this used to be something that everyone thought, well, that really only occurs in the really large companies, because of this advent of cloud solutions and best-of-breed approach, that issue is now becoming more prevalent even in smaller organizations. So it really runs the range from the small enterprises all the way to the large enterprises. Everybody's kind of suffering from the same problem with their customer data. And you can kind of look at some of those problems I've listed here in the middle here, but I kind of break them up into three types. There's data-related problems where you've got duplicates, you've got invalid data, you have missing fields, you have inconsistent information, inconsistent hierarchies, and those things just tend to get worse as time goes on. Then you've got people-related challenges where people can't access the data, they can't answer the questions that they have, or they are seeking but are unable to obtain that 360-degree view that Robin was talking about. And then the third area is process-related challenges, where you've got data in multiple places, and also people don't know what changed and when, because things are happening to the data all the time. So there's no control or governance over how to keep that data clean. So as you're attempting to deliver a more cohesive, cogent customer experience and engage in a dialogue with customers, it's really difficult to achieve that when your own data about those individuals isn't consistent and isn't accurate. Just as an aside, I saw, I think it was last week or the week before, an article in Information Management that was talking about why personalized marketing still isn't accurate. And they listed 9 reasons. The first 2 reasons in their list, data quality is poor and the data isn't integrated. So what can you do about this? Well, there's a couple of ways you can try and approach this problem and think about it in terms of what's going to cost your organization. You can either sort of attack that data when it's born, if you will, or you can attack it once it's infiltrated into your system. So here's a picture from an organization we worked with that actually highlighted about 30 different places where data was stored in their landscape. And so once that data has been kind of released into the wild, into these dozens of systems, it's hard to find, it's hard to maintain, it's expensive to fix if you think about going in and trying to fix it 30 different times in 30 different places. So one of the concepts we want to talk about is trying to be proactive and trying to fix things early in its life cycle as possible. Because when you do that, it's going to be easier to find, easier to control, and less expensive to fix and maintain. And that way you're going to get better data as you work downstream in your applications. So this is a concept we've been talking about called proactive MDM, and the tagline we like to use is the concept of cleaning the rivers, not the lakes. So there's 3 steps to that. First is to get clean, where you want to match and merge and cleanse and survive records as close to the source as possible to try and get a golden record so that you avoid polluting your downstream applications. And this can be done by implementing controls over sources or even providing a place to centrally author the data so that it's consistent and accurate before you release it into the wild. Enrichment is about adding additional value to the data as you go, including reference data and other information that's not in your source operational system. So this might be hierarchies, it might be segmentations, for example, that aren't inherently stored in those systems. And then the third part is about staying clean. And here's where you want to make sure you've got processes in place and people identified to do the stewardship and to do the governance, have tools available to enable those processes, and then proactively match and cleanse your data on a periodic basis so that it doesn't, so you avoid the decay that naturally is going to happen, for example, when people change jobs or they change their residence and so forth. So how do you get this? Well, there are a number of options that you could use to attack this problem. You could use a data quality tool. You could use a data integration tool to extract the information. You could use a workflow tool in order to apportion work out to different people. You could use a governance tool to keep track of who's doing what. And you could actually, string together all those different heritage tools and throw a lot of people at it. But that's all very expensive. It's very resource intensive. It's going to be slow to deploy, and it's going to be hard to manage. And you might even want to just start with your customer data, but you're also going to want to eventually manage your products, your list of products that those customers have, and the list of suppliers for those products, and the chart of accounts that you're using across your business to keep track of what's going on. Manage your employees who service those customers, and so forth. So now you're talking about multiple domains, suppliers, products, chart of accounts, employees, and so on, to try and deliver a 360-degree view of your entire business. So ideally, what we think you want to achieve is one solution to integrate, match, and cleanse your customer master data, one solution so you can manage the stewardship and the governance, and one tool that you can use to manage every data domain as you start with customer and move on. So that is the objective behind a new offering that we've just announced called Magnitude 1. And Magnitude 1 is an MDM offering designed for companies to integrate, harmonize, and manage their master data across those popular SaaS and on-premises applications that are in use, as we talked about earlier. And Magnitude 1 includes a number of components. First thing it includes is our Kaleido MDM solution, which has been deployed in some of the world's largest companies. And Eric, you were talking about your exposure to master data management back in 2003. I think this product originally came out around about 2004. So we've been an early pioneer in this space with this tool. We started out with using it to service the analytical use of the information to make sure that good data was getting into the warehouse. And over time, our customers have used it more and more on more operational use cases and managing multiple domains, including customer and product and financial and vendor and employee and so forth. So Kaleido MDM is a core part of this solution. We also deliver connectivity and integration to a wide variety of source systems via a partnership with Scribe Software using their Scribe Online integration platform as a service. It's a cloud-based integration offering with connections to over 40 systems, both on-premises and SaaS systems that organizations use. So with those two together, with our Kaleido MDM solution, it also includes an ability to have a workflow-driven environment for master data management and manage it through its whole life cycle. We have a matching engine that's in there that's specifically designed for handling customer data. And we also provide, in addition to the software, some virtual classroom training on the Kaleido MDM product and the modeling components. So, Robin, you talked about the model. That's a really critical part, and that's actually where we start in our solution. And we'll show you that in a moment, how you take that whiteboard that Des showed and translate that into something that can actually set up your MDM system. And the final point about Magnitude 1 is it's available on premises or as a cloud service. You can get a subscription license or a perpetual license. The idea is it's going to be easy for you to buy, maintain, implement, and maintain. So what this looks like then is Magnitude 1 at the center here with the robust capabilities to do everything in the white and the blue boxes. So connect to and access the customer data through the Scribe connector that I talked about, then do all the mastering exercises you need to do around matching data, merging, surviving, and enriching the data to get it clean, and then authorize and publish accurate and consistent data out to your consuming systems, along with an access layer for people to search for data, browse data, and even author new records so that your operational and analytical systems can stay clean as time goes on. We provide a web-based user interface for both the stewards and the admins, which you'll see in a moment, as well as the business users. Not only can they just browse and access that published master data, they can even play a role in the stewardship process. So imagine your sales representatives out talking to customers, they learn something new about the customer, they can raise a change request and say, hey, this customer's, they've changed their title, they've changed their email address, they've switched companies. Maybe this physician has switched an affiliation with this hospital. We want to make sure that we keep track of that sort of stuff. Or this insurance broker is now carrying these products. We want to make sure that we market these new insurance products to them, for example. So those kinds of things can be raised and serviced right as your customer-facing employees are dealing with those individuals. A couple of other attributes about our solution. Number one is this business model. Remember that whiteboard picture that Des showed that had the circles and the arrows and the ink? That's basically the business requirements for how the data needs to be, how it's used in the real world. And we start with something called a business information model, and we can basically capture those requirements and the attendant business rules and actually deploy that to create the rules in the MDM repository. So it effectively acts as a way to bridge the communications gap that we so often see between business people describing a requirement and IT having to go back and translate that into tables and mappings and so forth. So we have the business model driven approach to make sure that it's right from when you start. We also include automated processing for that and the embedded workflow and change management so that you can, if you have a change in your model or you add to it, you can rapidly deploy that and do that with a small team because of the automation. It doesn't require as much coding as maybe you might have expected to do. I mentioned the model-driven nature. That also drives the screens that actually appear. So when you have a description of a customer and you have their attributes there, what you'll see on the screen is the attributes that are defined in the model. So it's all created for you. You don't have to create any specific interface screens to map to the data. That's all driven off of the model. Another cool feature that we've introduced is the concept of an Excel integration for data stewards. This means the data stewards can use Excel as a place to edit the records that couldn't be automatically matched and approved and deployed. Now, you might think, well, this is you're just dumping data to Excel, right? Well, it's much more than that, because the cool thing about this capability is it overcomes the problem of just having renegade data updates by loading up data from Excel. We actually, when you download that data from Kaleido MDM to the Excel interface, it comes with the validation rules. So it'll tell you which of these cells need to be filled in order to make it a valid record. It'll give you a drop-down list of the available values or the approved values, for example, so that you basically avoid creating errors when you're updating the master data records. And then our embedded workflow engine makes sure the data is all processed and authorized for publication, and it also keeps track of who did what and when, and allow you to basically review and audit all of those former master data values so you can see how data has changed over time. So the benefit of this in terms of customer data is you can get to a place where you can have more personalized and relevant dialogues in interactions with customers. MDM is becoming more business critical, especially when you think about one-to-one marketing that's going on there. And this is a good example of the cycle that occurs. So you start out with data about your customers. This is the stuff that you master. Who are they? What products do they own? What can I match in terms of customer information across multiple systems? And then you enrich that with more information about them and how you've interacted in the past. What have they responded to? How do they want to be contacted? Maybe they want to be contacted by fax, so that's why it's still on their business card. But that information then gives you the insight you need in order to interact. So what are their preferences? Some of it's maybe coming from social sources, for example. And then you can decide from that, what's the next best action for those customers? What offer should I make? And that's going to generate some sort of interaction. They're going to download something. They're going to purchase something. And that's going to, of course, create more data that you want to feed into this virtuous cycle of marketing interactions. And as a result, then, you're going to be able to find and close new customers faster, increase upsell, deliver better customer service, eliminate errors, eliminate duplicate shipments, shipping for marketing materials, for example, and eventually lead to reduced sales and marketing costs. So one example of a customer of ours who did this, the UK's post office, was using Kaleido MDM to deliver better customer data so that they could deliver the right products and carry on their customer dialogues in the right channel, which ultimately led to higher sales volumes and increased margins for them. So that's just my introductory comments. I'd like to now turn it over to Diana to take you through and show you exactly how we do some of this.
Thank you, John. So hopefully we'll be able to bring some of this to life for you all. So what you should be seeing on your screen right now is an example of a Kaleido business information model. So part of the solution, what we're going to be showing you today, is an integration of data from Salesforce.com. Right here, we've got our Salesforce.com model in the lower left. That is, obviously a web-based application, the software as a service kind of application. We're going to be integrating it with data from our on-premise implementation of Oracle eBusiness Suite. So our goal is to take our contacts and account information from Salesforce.com, integrate it with our accounts receivable accounts and contact information into a single harmonized account and contact structure that we will then load into Microsoft Dynamics CRM. So our scenario here is we're migrating from having used Salesforce.com in the past to using Dynamics CRM, and we want to make sure that we have a fully integrated and harmonized list of customers, our 360-degree view, if you will, based in our new Dynamics CRM environment. So to build this, we've moved the data from Salesforce.com and EBS into Kaleido MDM, and we've actually run the harmonization process. So in the interest of time, we've sort of done the cooking, and we're going to enjoy the meal. So I'm going to switch over now to our MDM environment and just show you some of the things that we can do and the added features that an MDM solution adds to a simple connectivity integration of these platforms. Because one of the things that would happen, of course, is that you'd lose your history. You'd end up with your data in Microsoft Dynamics, but would you know where anything came from? And that's what the MDM, one of the things that the MDM solution can provide us. It gives us a history. So if we take a look at our list of harmonized accounts, and we pick one of those. Let's say we pick Albert Stores here. This gives us some information about where this Albert Stores record came from. We can see that it's an integration of two records, one that came from a Salesforce.com account called Albert and Gerard, and one that came from an EBS billing account called Albert Stores, and they were integrated together and harmonized into this single paired account called Albert Stores. We also see its original ID. We can see this data has already been migrated to Microsoft Dynamics, because here we have the CRM ID from Microsoft Dynamics. And we can see the time when the data was last updated. In addition to this, we provide another view that allows you to not only look at the data, but also through our graph view, you can look at the associations that the data participates in. So here we have that same record, our Albert Stores, with its associations to its accounts receivable account, its Salesforce.com account, and the contacts. If we select one of these contacts, we can see that that contact actually was a Salesforce.com contact. And likewise, our Adam Albert account was an EBS contact. So some of this movement of things on the screen is happening automatically. A couple of them I'm doing just to keep things easy to read. But as we keep going, we can take a look at the contact information and see that it came from our Salesforce.com account, and gradually build up a view that shows us all of the relationships that our data participates in. Right? In addition, seeing the ways in which we classify our Salesforce.com data, and that there are other accounts out there that are too numerous to list. Well, those things that are too numerous to list, we can still get to them because we can just scroll down the page here and get to the list of all those extra accounts that were too numerous to list in the graph view. And of course, we could start in graph view for any of these as well. So that's one way of dealing with things. We can see the data, we can manipulate the data. We also want to be able to remediate and to fix data. So a couple of ways to look at that. So one of the things we could do is we can go over and take a look at the hierarchy. Now I've saved our account hierarchy as one of my favorites, so I can save various categories of information as accounts, as well as hierarchical paths that I can use in my hierarchy browser. So here I can drill down through my hierarchy. I can see all of the various contacts that I have with each account. But one of the other things that this environment provides is the option to find all of the orphans. So these are contacts that came into our harmonized system that did not have parents in their sources. So these are orphans that have been left behind. So we brought these over and we've identified them. We know that these are orphaned. How do we fix that? Well, we just click this switch to edit mode, which opens up another view of the hierarchy, and we can now start classifying these folks. So maybe Bill Murray works for AC Network, so we can take him over and add him to the list. And we see him highlighted, like pointing out to us that this is a change. I can move Sandy and assign her maybe to A.G. Edwards and Company. Right? And as these changes are being made, they're being recorded down here. I can undo them if I realize I've made a mistake. I can gang multiples of them together and move them through the system as a unit by giving them a name. And then they would process as a single unit of work through my system. So this is one way, and obviously if I'm being proactive, I might want to go in here and look at this and see if there were orphans and address that problem. What if I didn't? What if I wasn't being proactive? Well, again, our system includes a workflow, as John mentioned earlier, a workflow solution that allows us to deal with this more directly. So to do that, I'm going to log off as system administrator. I'm going to now log on as our data steward. Right? So this would be the individual who's responsible for managing invalid data. So you'll see as soon as I log on, I get taken to my inbox where, guess what, there's our 11 orphaned records. Because the relationship, the association between the contacts and their accounts is mandatory. All of the harmonized accounts that did not have the appropriate connections to an account are invalid. They move through the workflow. And as we can see in the diagram of the workflow, here's where we are now, right, remediating the records. They would then flow through an approval process, approved by the sales manager, approved by accounting, and then finally authorized for publication on the next batch update of our Dynamics environment. Of course, this could also be set up to run in real time, in which as soon as it's published, as soon as it's authorized for publication, it would just immediately flow out to Dynamics. So it's up to you how do you want to configure that last step of the interface. So hopefully this has given you all a brief overview of just some of the ways in which our MDM tool can help enrich and enhance our environment. There are many, many other ways that we can enhance your use of your customer information and really get to that point where you've got a truly harmonized 360-degree view of customer with all of the information in one place available to the users, not only through this provider UI, but as John mentioned, we also provide a consumer interface, a sort of web portal, where if a user knows that there's been a change in account, he can raise a change request and address that and route that change request directly to the data steward to make any changes to this record that they see needs to be made. So at this point, I think I'll turn it back over to Eric, and we'll go into the Q&A.
Sure thing. So we got a couple good questions from the audience here. I'll throw one out, but maybe first Des or Robin, do you have any questions? Maybe start with you, Des.
One of the things that I come across every single time I go through this journey with an organization is this whole challenge of version control. Could you just touch on the approach towards version control around data? So imagine a scenario where 3 different parts of the organization are dealing with me as a customer, and they're making various updates and changes through now a new tool. How do we address the issue of just version controlling the data that's coming through the business and who's curating and controlling and approving that?
That's an excellent question. So one of the things that is built in and baked into our solution is audit trailing and history. So I'll see if I can find a record with history. Let me see if our Albert Stores record that we were using has history. As soon as I click on history mode, what this does for me, this one has no changes in history, but what it does is it would show us any interim changes that were made here and the date and time at which they were made. In addition, I can go to full history details, and if I've turned on audit trailing, I would not only see those changes and when they were made, but the audit trail would then tell me who made those changes, what user made those changes as well. So our approach to versioning is more time-based rather than by setting arbitrary labels. You can pick a point in time and see your data as it was at that point in time and migrate the data as it was at that point in time. And we track, of course, the history not only of the data content, but also of the data model. So as your data model may evolve, you add new classifications, we track that as well, and you can always roll back and see things as they were at any given point in time.
Data models are an interesting challenge, aren't they? I mean, you've got a significant pedigree of dealing with some substantial verticals. Can you give us a couple of examples of some of the data models that are already in place and some you've dealt with? I mean, there's key sectors like manufacturing and retail and logistics, and in financial services you've got banking and wealth management and so forth. So is the approach to come with a pre-built model that can quickly spin up a project that people can start to map where the gaps are, or do they have to build and train that model themselves?
Well, we've taken both approaches over the years. We've tried coming with models and found that the more complete a model is, really means the more changes you end up having to make to it, the more customizations you need to make to it for the customer. So we have really taken the approach of fragments of models, certain basic common elements that we find really permeate entire industries. So we have, for example, in financial services, we have models for in capital markets for securities and derivatives, et cetera. We have models for insurance, for property and liability insurance, for reinsurance, both of which manage risk in different ways. We have manufacturing models for products and bills of materials, bills of lading. We have other portions of the model for supply chain, that track intermediate warehouses, distribution models, aging of inventory, things like that. So for lots of our customers, we've got customers in almost every vertical you can think of, but for many of them we have been able to develop certain core components that we assemble for a customer into a finished model.
Yeah, let me just add to that, Diana. The model that we showed a minute ago with the sort of orange background is really a conceptual model. So it has, vowels and there's no underscores. I mean, it's something that a human being can understand. It's not an IT concept per se. It's something that a business person can understand. So we have these conceptual models. We can import an existing model that you might have and refactor it in order to get it this way. But as Diana talked about, we can when we have a model fragment or an example model that we've used before, we show that to a customer usually within a little while of kind of looking at it and putting it up on the screen and sort of pointing and gesturing. They can usually refactor that model to get it to be pretty representative of what they're trying to accomplish. So it does accelerate the time in order to capture those requirements so that you can get on with it. But the other thing we didn't show here is, there's this diagram, but there's also a tab called Operations where you basically press a button and it generates all of the objects that you need in the MDM repository, along with the rules that you've set up for, what's optional, what's mandatory, what are the what's the cardinality, all of that stuff that you want to do. But there's a button there that says deploy, and it will just generate the model that you've got created on the front end. So we do have fragments. We do have experience in a wide variety of industries, and our consultants are able to enable customers to get started very rapidly.
So the other quick one before I hand over to Robin. Oh, yeah, sorry, go.
I just, quick note that we generally run these modeling sessions as sort of a JAD session because we're not so much interested in the details of all of the attributes. We can fill that in later when we get to it. But what we're really interested in is getting the business view of how the data hangs together and how they understand it to be useful. And that's how we want to build the solution.
No, that all makes great sense. One last quick one, and then I'll hand back to Robin. So the thing that I immediately imagine would happen as I have this conversation to organizations that I deal with is that they have a view, they already have governance frameworks and tools in place. What's the experience like when you go into an organization where, let's just say the management team have decided they're going to go down this route and become customer-centric and clean up their customer data and get a single view, and yet IT and other parts of the business may have already felt they've run multiple programs of work to get to a good place on that?
Well, that is an interesting question. I will say that MDM implementations generally will fail unless there is that sort of high-level support. I think that these projects have to be driven from a fairly high level in an organization because there is a cultural change that needs to be accepted. I think Robin spoke to this earlier, that it is not something that you just do as a project, and it tends to be the way it is often approached in IT organizations. It is an ongoing program. It is something that requires commitment and willingness to change, if you will, to implement. And then when you have that, I think we found that implementations go very well. Where we have had to struggle in some implementation has been where there has been either not high-level management support or where the IT organization has been resistant to change. But we've been fairly successful in both cases in winning them over. I think once we show them how simple it is to get up and operating and how it really takes the responsibility for data content off of their shoulders. And really, IT shouldn't be responsible for that. Business knows what makes up good data. IT shouldn't need to know that. IT should be responsible for the things that they do well, organizing data, keeping it safe, keeping it secure. And so, and usually they come around and see it that way.
Yeah, we've got a few questions from the audience. Let me throw these out here, and we're going a little bit over time, but we'd like to get to all the questions that we can, or at least try. So I'll throw this one over to you, maybe John or Diane, either way. An attendee asks, do you have functionality developed to re-parent from bad records to golden records? So transactions like, for example, sales orders right in the operational systems. Not sure I know exactly what he means there, but hopefully you can answer that.
Well, we can certainly reparent records. That's a very standard part of the solution. But within the operational systems, not directly. We could do it in the MDM environment and then push that data back from the MDM environment once it's been published from the MDM environment, push it back to the operational system. But it would not be directly we would not be correcting it directly in the operational system from the MDM environment.
Gotcha. Okay, and here's another question: can the tool be used to see data lineage?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Again, this is not a great model for that kind of illustration, but absolutely, where you've got a history to your data, where data has come from multiple places, we can tag it with its source and carry that information forward to the published data.
Actually, there's an element of that here in the model, isn't there, Diana? I mean, you've got the SFDC contacts and the EBS contacts, and that actually came through in the graph view as well. So it can it kind of hangs around with the data.
Yeah. I mean, obviously, in a real lineage environment, you'd have a more robust solution and implementation. Just a basic one was done here.
Okay, good. Just a couple more questions, and then we'll wrap up. One attendee is asking, how do you support the definition of households? Do you have a way to enrich customer master data with social networks?
That's on our roadmap. Enrichment with social network data is on our roadmap. It's not in the product at the moment, but in terms of householding as part of our matching and merging capabilities. So in the process of matching, there are a great many knobs and levers that you can control for weights of particular portions of the data. But what it ultimately allows us to do is to gather together all of the individual contact records that may be part of the same household. And it understands the difference between companies and people. And in companies, you generally look at the beginning, the sort of the significance of the words in a name in a company, start from the front and work towards the end. But when you're doing householding, you really want to start at the end and work towards the front with people's names. So, it understands that and is able to do a pretty good job of gathering together contacts that belong to a single household.
And one final question, what about restaurant customers? We got a good, knowledgeable customer, audience member on here asking if you have any restaurant customers.
Actually, no. That would be a new vertical for us. We'd be really interested in pursuing that. We have customers that supply restaurants, but we don't have any restaurants that are customers.
Okay, no worries at all. Well, folks, we've burned through an hour and 5 minutes here, so a very big thank you to our presenters today. We will archive this webcast, so all these archives are available for later viewing. Big thanks to our presenters today. Big thanks to, of course, Des and Robin for their insights, and to Magnitude Software. This is good stuff. MDM is here to stay, folks. There's no doubt about that. It's really important to get that central view. That's going to be more important as time goes by, I have to think, as customers decide that they don't want to be mistreated. They want to get the best treatment possible, and that's the way it's going to be. So with that, folks, we're going to bid you farewell. Thank you once again. We'll talk to you tomorrow, another webcast tomorrow. Yes, Hot Technologies is the hottest show around these days. We'll talk to you hopefully tomorrow at 4 o'clock Eastern. Till then, take care, folks. Bye-bye. All right.